Welcome to the place where love isn't just told, it's felt. Here, every story is a journey through the kind of moments that change a life forever. The quiet knock in the middle of the night that wakes something long asleep. The eyes that meet and speak louder than words ever could. The first touch that turns the air heavy with wanting. And the love that shifts the rhythm of your heart so completely it can never go back. These are not just stories. They are living, breathing memories told in a voice that lets you feel every pause, every glance, every heartbeat. If you've ever believed in the kind of connection that burns slow but deep, you're in the right place. Because here, every moment matters and every heartbeat tells a story. It was the kind of night where the air feels too still, as if it's holding its breath. Outside, the world was cloaked in darkness, the kind that presses close against the windows, muting every sound, every movement. There was only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. Then it happened, a knock. Not the frantic pounding of urgency, not the timid tap of uncertainty, but something in between. Deliberate, steady, and full of meaning. It carried weight, as if it had traveled through more than just the night air. It landed deep, somewhere unguarded, stirring something that hadn't moved in years. It wasn't just a sound against wood, it was an invitation, a memory, a challenge. For a long moment there was no movement toward the door, just stillness, listening, feeling the pulse change, the rhythm of the night altering. That knock carried a presence, and somehow it was already known. There was history in it, an unspoken recognition, like the echo of a voice long gone but never forgotten. The handle felt cool under the hand, the quiet click of the latch unnervingly loud in the silence. Then the door swung open, and there he was standing in the pale spill of light from the hallway. His shadow stretching behind him like it had followed him for miles. His eyes caught first, not because of their color, but because of the way they looked. Deep, steady, almost searching. They didn't simply see, they reached. Memories rose like smoke summer evenings from years ago, laughter drifting over fences, a boy's shy glances that lingered too long before being quickly turned away. Now there was no shyness. The boy was gone, replaced by someone whose presence filled the doorway, whose gaze held a weight that made the air feel charged. No words came at first, only the soft sound of his breathing, slow and measured, the faint scent of the night air clinging to him. The space between was thin, fragile, as if one step forward might collapse it entirely. It was in that pause, that moment of suspended reality, when something unspoken passed between. Not a question, not an answer, but an understanding. His voice was low when it finally came, almost blending into the hum of the night. The words themselves were simple, but the way they carried. It was as though they were pulled from somewhere far deeper than his lips. That sound alone was enough to make the room feel smaller, warmer. Every movement after that felt amplified, the subtle shift of his shoulders, the way his fingers flexed at his sides, the faint glint in his eyes that suggested he was holding back more than he was letting show. It was impossible not to notice the way his presence seeped into the space, unhurried but undeniable, filling it like light creeping into a darkened room. There was an ache there, a familiar one, the kind that comes when something long hidden wakes up and demands to be felt again. It wasn't the ache of sadness, but the kind born from recognition of knowing, without reason or logic, that this moment had been waiting to happen. That knock had not been random, it had been a call. And standing there, the night pressing close around the walls, the sound of his breathing mingling with the thud of the heart, it became clear, nothing about this was ordinary. That single knock had pulled something buried into the open. It had awakened a desire that had been sleeping for far too long, and there was no putting it back to rest. The door was open, and so was everything else. The moment the door opened, the world seemed to narrow until there was nothing but the space between two people and the quiet pull of their gaze. His eyes found mine instantly, as if there had been no years, no distance, no changes. They didn't just meet, they reached. There was something alive in them, something that moved past the surface and into places I had kept closed for longer than I could remember. It was more than looking, it was being seen. Not the way strangers see, or even the way friends see, but the way someone does when they remember who you were before the world changed you. In that look was the sound of summers long gone, the echo of laughter under dim streetlights, and the quiet moments when his gaze would linger just a little too long before quickly slipping away. Now there was no slipping away. Those eyes held steady, as if they had every right to. They pulled slow and deliberate, stirring what had been carefully buried. It wasn't just memory they brought forward, it was the ache of knowing those memories had never been enough. Every unspoken word, every moment of almost, every brush of possibility that had been ignored. All of it rose between us in silence. The night air clung to him, carrying with it a faint chill, but his eyes held warmth. It wasn't a simple kind of warmth, though. It was the kind that burns slow, the kind that lingers in the chest and spreads. It was steady, controlled, but underneath there was an intensity that felt dangerous, not in a way that threatened harm, but in the way a storm threatens to change everything it touches. No words were needed. None could have said more than what was already there. The way his gaze moved over my face wasn't hurried. It was as if he was taking inventory of every detail, every line time had written, every shadow and light. It felt like he was looking for pieces of the person he remembered and finding them, changed yet still familiar. There was a moment small, almost nothing when his eyes softened, and it felt like a surrender. Not a surrender to me, but to whatever this was between us, whatever had been growing in the dark, unseen for years. The space seemed to draw tighter, the air heavier, as if the night itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. I didn't move, neither did he, and yet everything moved inside that stillness. That silent conversation between our eyes spoke of what had been missed, what had been wanted, what had been held back. It was an exchange of truth without a single sound. It's strange how much can pass between two people without words, how an entire history can be revisited in the span of a glance, how every guarded feeling can find its way to the surface without permission. His eyes told me he remembered. They told me he had wondered. They told me he had wanted. And they told me in a way that could not be misunderstood that the wondering was over. The air between us felt fragile, like glass, and yet charged, like it might shatter if either of us breathed too deeply. The stillness wasn't empty. It was full, brimming with every memory, every forbidden thought, every quiet wish that had gone unspoken. His gaze didn't waver, and in that steadiness was something both comforting and unsettling. When he finally blinked, it was slow, deliberate, and somehow it felt like an answer. I didn't know what the question had been, but I knew the answer. The night outside seemed far away now, the world beyond the doorway forgotten. There was only that look, that pull, that unbroken line between his eyes and mine. Somewhere deep inside, a truth settled nothing would erase the way he had just looked at me. And nothing would ever be the same after it. It was supposed to be nothing more than a conversation in the doorway, a brief exchange before the night swallowed him back into its quiet. But something shifted, subtle at first, almost invisible. A small lean forward, the faintest tilt of his head, and the air seemed to change its weight. The space between was so small it felt fragile, and yet it pulled instead of pushed. Words no longer seemed important. There was only the closeness, the awareness of how near he was. His hand moved not hurried, not unsure, and the back of his fingers grazed mine. It was barely a touch, almost accidental, but it landed like lightning. Heat traveled from that single point, threading through the skin, deeper than any contact should have reached. Breathing became different, shorter, quieter, as if the sound itself might disturb what was happening. The faint scent of him mixed with the cool trace of night air still clinging to his clothes, and every inhale seemed to draw him closer without a step being taken. His fingertips brushed again, this time slower, lingering just long enough to feel the texture of skin against skin. There's something about the first real touch that carries more than its weight in meaning. It's not just skin meeting skin, it's every unspoken thought, every restrained want, every moment of imagining collapsing into something tangible. It wasn't rushed, but there was an undeniable pull, a current neither of us tried to resist. When his hand shifted slightly, the side of his thumb traced over mine, and the air thickened. It was as though the room had grown smaller, warmer, the darkness outside pressing closer while something bright sparked in the shadows. The distance between our faces closed just enough for breath to mingle, soft and warm in the cool air. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was everything a kiss could be without being one: a promise, a question, and an answer all tangled into the smallest space between two people. The warmth of his hand moved up, slow, deliberate, until his palm rested lightly against my wrist. It wasn't a grip, but it held more than any grip could. It was possession and permission at once. There was no need to speak. The silence was loud enough, filled with the quiet hum of something that had been waiting for far too long to be felt. Every part of me was aware of where his fingers were, how his touch moved, how the slow rhythm of his breathing matched the unsteady rhythm of my own. The shadows around us seemed to shift, the night leaning in as if it wanted to witness what it had sparked. That heat between us grew, not in a rush, but in a slow, consuming way that made it impossible to think of anything else. The doorway that had once separated us had now become the frame for something that could never be undone. When his fingertips slid along the side of my hand, his knuckles brushing over skin that felt far too sensitive now, it wasn't just contact, it was ignition. The kind of ignition that doesn't explode, but burns steadily, sinking deep until it becomes impossible to imagine putting it out. It was only a touch, but it had the weight of years. Years of distance, of waiting, of never quite saying or doing what was felt. And in that moment, in the quiet heat of the dark, all of it was finally allowed to exist. The night had changed, and so had everything else. The night had its own pulse, steady and slow, carrying us through each breath, each glance, each unspoken truth. Time seemed to stretch, bending itself around the way his presence filled the room. There was no sense of before or after, only the warmth of now, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the quiet weight of his gaze that never once let go. The hours passed unnoticed. The world outside went on, unaware of how the air in this small space had shifted, how the rhythm of two hearts had found each other in the dark. Every word spoken had a softness to it, not because of caution, but because the moment itself demanded it, the kind of softness that doesn't fade, the kind that lingers long after the sound has gone. When morning crept in, it did so gently, spilling its pale light through the curtains, as if it knew it was entering something sacred. The sounds of the world began to stir distant cars, the faint rustle of wind through the trees, but they felt muted, as though they belonged to another place entirely. The world outside hadn't changed. Its streets were the same, its people would go about their routines as they always did, but inside everything was different. There was a stillness, not the empty kind, but the full kind, full of meaning, full of the weight of what had been shared in the quiet hours before dawn. The mind kept replaying every detail, the warmth of his hand, the way his voice seemed to sink into the skin, the moment his eyes softened in a way that would be impossible to forget. Every heartbeat felt different now. It was no longer a simple rhythm. It carried something with it, something that didn't belong to just one person anymore. His name was there, unspoken but present, woven into the steady thud in the chest. The thought of him wasn't separate from the body, it had become part of it, as essential as breath. The light touched his face in a way that made the night's shadows seem like they had been keeping him for this very moment. There was no need to reach out and touch him again to know that the connection was still there, still alive, still changing the shape of the morning. It was in the way his presence filled the silence, in the way his breathing seemed to set the pace for everything else. There's a certain kind of love that doesn't announce itself with grand gestures or loud declarations. It doesn't need to. It slips in quietly, changes everything it touches, and stays. That was what had happened here, not the kind of change that fades with daylight, but the kind that becomes part of the way a heart beats, part of the way life moves forward. By the time the sun had fully claimed the room, there was an unshakable knowing. The world could carry on as it always had, but nothing inside would ever return to the way it was before, and every beat of the heart, without fail, would carry his name. If this story touched something inside you, let it stay with you. Like, subscribe, and stay close. More moments like this are waiting.